I'm thrilled to introduce our guest speaker. His name is Jamie Merisotis, and we bonded immediately. I said, I want to make sure I pronounce your name properly. I said, is it Mayer? He said, it sounds like Roger Maris, right? A little baseball guy. Jamie Merisotis. And Jamie is a he's a globally recognized leader in philanthropy, higher ed, and public policy. Since 2008, he's been the president and CEO of the Lumina Foundation. So you may be familiar with Lumina. It's one of the largest private foundations in the U.S. The sole mission is to increase American success in higher education. Under Jamie's leadership, the foundation has set a very ambitious goal. We have ambitious goals. This is an awesome goal. They want to increase the proportion of Americans with high-quality degrees, certificates, and other credentials to 60% by 2025. That is very ambitious. And Jamie's input on higher ed issues is regularly sought after in the public environment from both sides of the aisle. His new book, America Needs Talent, offers a provocative take on what our country needs to create a higher education system that's truly relevant for the world we're living in. I know these themes resonate with all of you because the work that we're doing here to advance the mission of education, and it's a great pleasure and honor to introduce Jamie Merisotis. Jamie? Welcome. Thank you very much.
Kevin.
Welcome. Thank you.
Well, wonderful to be here. How's everybody doing? I really enjoyed that presentation from Michael. It's a great way to get us started. I want to begin first by thanking the executive team for Cengage for the opportunity to be here. I'd like to point out that I'm the only speaker that you will hear at this summit in the next 3 days whose attire perfectly matches the theme of the Points of Light. To look very closely at the suit now, I think you're going to agree I've got 120 million of them right here. So know your audience. It's very important to know your audience. You know, I feel like I do know my audience here at Cengage. I've spent my career working for several decades in this sphere of education, particularly higher education, and I'm naturally inclined to a company that really understands how you bring together these issues of transforming learning through engagement. I think that's a very important part of what I think about, what I do every day. And in fact, it might be even a little bit intimidating for me standing up here to realize that I've come here to offer information to people who, in a lot of ways, have really been, for me, a source of so much good information for not just me, but for all of us working in this space. Nevertheless, I'm here. I'm really happy to be here, and I appreciate the chance to tell you how invigorating it is to have this chance to work with and be around so many people whose professional lives are animated by this idea of innovation, both in the learning space and in the workforce development space. As CEO of Lumina Foundation, I share your zeal for this focus on innovation. Now, Kevin mentioned a little bit about Lumina Foundation. For those of you who aren't familiar with who we are, Lumina Foundation is, simply put, the nation's largest private foundation focused solely on increasing success in post-secondary learning. As Kevin mentioned, we work in a very targeted way. All of our energy, all of our efforts are focused on this goal, what Michael called a hairy goal, to have 60% of Americans with a high-quality post-secondary degree, certificate, or other credential by the year 2025. Anybody know what we're at right now, roughly? We are, if you count just degrees, associate and bachelor's degrees, we're at about 40%. And if you add in what are the best estimates of high-quality certificates and other non-degree credentials, the total is about 46%. We've got a long way to go, for sure. The nation's post-secondary attainment rate, I think, is important because it explains, in part, why we at Lumina Foundation have this zeal for innovation. Because if you think about it, there is no way we are going to get to this goal simply by supersizing the current system. It's just not going to happen. So this goal, we call it Goal 2025, is really an effort to take a bold and effective new approach to how we approach higher education, reaching many more students than we reach today and giving them far more of what they need to be able to succeed. I think we'd all agree that outside of this room, much of what we call a higher education is seen as, it's seen as hidebound in many ways. It's seen as resistant to change. And I understand where that comes from. Frankly, I've worked in the space for 30 years, so I've experienced a lot of that hidebound nature of the enterprise. But I think everybody in this room knows that a change is most definitely afoot in higher education. Those of us who truly care about this enterprise, and especially about the students that it serves, recognize that change is not something we should fear. In fact, it's something that we should embrace. And it's clear that everyone in this room is firmly in that camp. Innovation is really your life's work, your bread and butter. You work every day to bring about the kinds of positive changes that are necessary to make higher education properly serve the millions of individual students who need to succeed in education, particularly in college, but also to serve a larger national purpose. The fact is, it's not just the students who earn these degrees and certificates and other credentials that benefit. Really, all of us as Americans need those individuals to do so. The increasing demands of our 21st century economy and of our democracy and society simply won't be met unless we dramatically increase high-quality post-secondary educational attainment by this massive and ongoing infusion of talent. Now, talent is something that I talk a lot about in my work. In fact, I've talked about it so much that I decided to write a book about it. And my book, as you see here, is called America Needs Talent. And it was not released 100 years ago. It was released in September, so just a few months ago. And I think it draws on some of the lessons that I've learned by working for these last three decades in this space of the intersection of higher education and philanthropy and public policy. I'm hoping that some of these ideas can be very helpful to all of you. So if you'll indulge me, what I want to do is explore some of these ideas, beginning with the basic idea that talent is really the key to our success here in the 21st century. And if you think about it, talent, that is human capital and capacity, talent has always been central to our prosperity and progress as a nation. To fully understand this, I think it's important to recognize where we were in the 20th century as a nation and what's different today. Now, in many ways, the 20th century defined who we are as a nation for ourselves and for the world at large. This picture is an interesting example of pre-World War II America, circa 1939. And if you look very carefully at that guy sitting on the roof with a mandolin in his hands, you'll notice he looks a little bit like me. That's actually my dad. Now, in this picture, he's 17 years old, somewhere in rural New Hampshire. My dad's parents immigrated to the U.S. from Greece just a few years before he was born. And by the time of this photo, he had actually dropped out of high school to support his family. His father wasn't able to find work during the Depression, so my father used his great skill as a guitar and mandolin player, which he actually began playing when he was 7 years old, to help the family survive, literally survive. A few years later, he was drafted. He was shot down in the European theater and was a POW for 17 months. He returned home in 1945 to eventually settle into a working-class career. This work ethic that my dad had, it never wavered in his 92 years of life. My parents, my brothers, my grandmother, and I, we all lived in a working-class community in a two-bedroom house just outside of Hartford, Connecticut. And, the truth is, we never fully made it into the middle class. But with the combined effort of both my parents, my dad with his affable, ethical, effusive personality as a salesman, some of you may represent that in this room today. My mother with her hard work ethic, with her focus on being productive as a staff member in the local police department, we were okay. My parents were driven by this idea that all of their children, their 4 sons, had to go to college, and they saved every penny that they had to make that possible. And although it wasn't nearly enough, the truth is I'm a walking advertisement for every government, college, church, and community financial aid program you can think of. My brothers and I all ended up making it through, doing reasonably well, and hopefully doing some good along the way for the world. Millions of families like mine made it in the 20th century. We were the products of this can-do spirit, a combination of values and opportunities, an American century that I think we all understand represented who we were in that time period. For proof of that, just look at what we accomplished in the 20th century. In this period, which Life magazine publisher Henry Luce famously called the American century, we were driven by the unifying belief in the very idea of America, where hard work and self-determination reaped rich rewards. It was the American century because we believed, because we had the American people, and they had the talent to make us successful in just about everything that we did. Think about what was accomplished in that century. We won the Cold War. We landed on the moon. We cured polio. We even created the internet. How did we do it? We did it with talent. But I think it's worth asking here in the early parts of the 21st century, do we still have what it takes? Do we still believe? Can we muster the talent to do it all again? Well, I certainly believe we can, but we can't do it the same way we did it back then. Frankly, just too much has changed. Global competition has soared. Some 2 million jobs are unfilled right now because of the lack of qualified talent. 3/4 of CEOs say that they can't fill positions because of the lack of qualified people to actually fill them. And 2/3 of all the jobs being created today require some form of post-secondary education. In short, the recipe for 21st century success is far more complex, and the need for talent, all kinds of talent, is greater than ever. Now, I've just used this word talent about a dozen times already, and I haven't actually explained exactly what I mean, so that's probably worth doing. Let me tell you quickly what I mean when I say talent. I say that talent is what happens when knowledge, skills, and abilities are honed by education and experience in ways that benefit both individuals and society at large. The point here is that talent is much more than innate ability. It's knowledge of particular domains and the human context that give it meaning. Just as our society has evolved, so too must our view of talent and the means for developing it. And what that means is that we have to make deliberate choices to actually grow talent in America. Deliberate choices from government, certainly from the private sector, from education and individuals. In the book, I lay out these 5 ways that we can actually get to this more talented society. The 5 ideas are listed here. I'm not going to read them to you. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go into too much detail on any of these, but let's quickly take a look at each one of these, and then I'll come back to some of these overarching themes here at the end of my discussion with you today. The first is the obvious one. It's one that I think many of you in this room fully understand, which is that we need to redesign the higher education system. You know, we need to take an entirely new approach to higher education in this country, redesigning the system so that it serves today's students, the students who are actually the ones who have to succeed in today's and tomorrow's world. You know, for all of its good points, the fact is today's higher education system simply can't produce the talent that we need to go forward. Far from it. Think about it. Today's post-secondary system is far too unaffordable for too many of our fellow citizens, especially for those in the growing populations of students who, we used to call them non-traditional students, and now, in fact, they're really the norm. Those who are non-white or first generation, those who attend part-time, those who work, and those who have children. The system also doesn't produce enough graduates. I already made that point in terms of 2/3 of the jobs being created require post-secondary learning, and yet we're at less than 50% at that level today. And frankly, it doesn't always give those graduates the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities that they need to ensure their long-term career success. So, I think to address these problems and to close the attainment gaps that we need to close and maximize talent development, we have to redesign the system so that it better serves today's students and meets society's needs. That type of system has to be affordable, It has to be student-centered, and it has to be relentlessly focused on quality. This is an absolute necessity if we hope to produce the human capital, the talent, that the 21st century actually demands. Next, probably worth pointing out in an audience like this, private sector innovation is hugely important to solve our talent deficit. That means what we need to do is really harness a small portion of what are actually trillions of dollars currently in play in private capital markets, and also apply the risk-taking approaches of businesses like Cengage, of foundations like Lumina Foundation, to help actually meet this challenge. Innovation thrives when education and employment are tightly intertwined, and when both are really focused on the real-world needs of today's citizens. So we need to help these private sector players like this company do more and better by giving them the tools that they need to be more consciously focused on talent development and talent deployment. I think what's required here is a combination of strategies. Programs like you see there on the iPad, the Starbucks College Achievement Plan, which we helped to design. Innovative organizations like B corporations, which employ the best practices of for-profit companies without making profit the only or the primary motive. And new financing mechanisms like social innovation bonds, which I think you're going to see take off here in the next couple of years, to actually fund specific talent outcomes. Now, a lot of this is relatively untested, to be sure, but I think these new ways of unleashing private sector innovation to increase American talent are truly worth exploring. And these private sector efforts can be augmented by action in the public sector, specifically by what I say in the book is the creation of a new entity called a U.S. Department of Talent. Now, let me hear your skepticism loud and clear right now. I got it. I've done this talk more than 30 times around the country. I hear it every time I mention it. So let me tell you what I have in mind here. Because I want to start by saying the last thing we need is yet another federal agency and bureaucracy. I completely agree with that point. So let me explain my point. This new U.S. Department of Talent would actually have three entities consolidated into one. The first is the U.S. Department of Education, in whole, because its mission is to foster educational excellence and ensure access. So we'll take the entire U.S. Department of Education and merge that with the Employment and Training Administration of the U.S. Department of Labor. The Employment and Training Administration administers programs and funds that help grow the workforce and support dislocated workers. And then you combine that with the Citizenship and Immigration Service's talent recruitment functions under the Department of Homeland Security, including programs that connect companies in need of talent with skilled immigrants and help foreign-born talent actually navigate the immigration process. Each of these entities plays a distinct role in talent cultivation, but bundled together, think about how these components could work together to make for an entity that could develop and implement strategies for linking standards-driven K-12 education, obviously taking the lead from states, bringing that together with locally managed workforce development programs, and bringing that together with highly focused global recruitment strategies. I think the net result would be a powerful vehicle for tackling the nation's talent challenges head-on, both efficiently and effectively. I think this kind of interconnected approach would certainly help us as we seek to close those talent gaps and enrich our cultural and social well-being. Doing this, I think, would show that the federal government is serious and strategic about its role in developing, harnessing, and actually deploying the talent that we need. We can also boost the nation's talent quotient by rethinking our entire approach to immigration. Now, let's be clear, immigration is a core part of the American success story. After all, we're a nation of immigrants, built on and constantly renewed by the energy and the innovation that a diverse population brings to all of us. I think that, frankly, we're at one of the most challenging points in American history when it comes to any sort of reasonable discussion about immigration, and I think that's troubling on many levels. Because I don't think our immigration debate should be about who we want within our borders or where they should come from. It should really be about what type of society we want and how we can actually recruit the talent that we need to help construct it. Think of it this way. Immigration as an issue Immigration has problems, like border security, that we have to address. But treating immigration on the whole as a problem, rather than as a deeply effective strategy for shaping the American society we want, that's just plain wrong. Our immigration policy has to be aimed squarely at meeting the nation's talent needs. We need to emulate the deliberate skills-based models that we've seen work in other countries, like Australia and Canada. And we need to complement those by improving education and training policies to better educate the immigrants who are already here. By focusing what the nation needs in terms of talent, we have the ability to actually meet the entire continuum of talent needs, from low to middle to high end. We can also boost the nation's talent quotient, I think, by, gonna get me out of sequence here again, by actually seeing our cities as hubs of talent. That is, finding new ways to boost the talent quotient by actually tapping into the tremendous potential of our nation's urban areas. I believe we need to see cities not as challenges to be solved, social and economic problems to be fixed, but in fact hubs of talent, places where innovation and creativity actually thrive and grow. Now, communities that are succeeding in this model are actually finding that the best way to do this is to cultivate talent in addition to attract the talent and keeping the talent that it produces. Now, I want to be clear here that certainly attracting talent, that is bringing talent to your city, is certainly a viable approach, one that many cities have used quite successfully. Think about places like Austin and Denver as just two examples of cities that have done enormously well using their natural or their other resources to actually draw people to those communities. Now, on the whole, this idea of talent attraction is attractive, of course. It's a plus. But it also has some costs, and I don't just mean, urban sprawl and traffic and those kind of things. One is that talent attraction could actually end up being a zero-sum game. Think about it. One city's gain could be another city's loss. That doesn't really solve America's talent challenge. Equally important, I think, in many metro areas, talent attraction actually has another cost, and that is increasing social inequity. Because here's what happens. As the creative and the entrepreneurial classes move in, the local residents, those are often low income and minority and first generation populations, they can be left behind in that urban renaissance. So the cities that succeed as talent hubs, they're the ones that confront those equity and demographic issues. Yes, they can attract talent, but they work hard to develop and keep the homegrown talent that they actually have. They close the attainment gaps and work to ensure that progress is broadly shared. The successful talent hubs are those where the various sectors work actually together, harmoniously, collaboratively, and deliberately. They set goals, they work hard, they listen to what employers need, and they foster a sense of place. All of these things are important elements of what makes cities talent hubs. So, what can we actually expect if we actually revamp our approaches to education, to immigration, to innovation, and implement some of these other ideas that I've shared with you here this morning? Well, I think we can imagine a very different society, one than the one we have now. Because in the second American century, we can be a much more equitable society, one in which employers more fully recognize and realize the value of a diverse talent pool, and where policymakers use education strategies and things like social innovation efforts to actually broaden opportunity and boost success for all Americans. National prosperity will no longer merely be defined by the size of our economy, but by an increasingly innovative private sector driven to meet America's social as well as its economic objectives. In the second American century, our gross talent product, a new concept I propose in the book that reflects both the market and the non-market monetary value of talent on our shared prosperity, will actually increase, creating a cascade of benefits where knowledge, skills, and abilities return so much to all of us as individuals in society. Well, these are the things that are possible in the second American century when America has the talent that it needs to be prosperous. But the path to get there is surely quite different than the one that we followed in the 20th century. And that takes me back to where I started, to the 20th century when my father was in his late teens and America was a very different place. You know, in the years that followed, my dad and my mother worked very hard. They made their own way, and they created opportunity for themselves and for their children. Today, thanks in large part to their insistence on education, to the idea that we need to advance our knowledge, skills, and abilities in very concrete and deliberate ways, those children, these four ugly guys that you see on the screen there, they are all, in their own way, successful adults. But the point is, our path to success wasn't the same one that our parents took. And the path that my kids will need to take in the coming years, along with your own children and grandchildren, that path will have to be different than the one that I took. Profoundly different, in fact. My friends, now is the time to clear that new path to foster talent in America. With that kind of framework in place, we can usher in yet another American century, one that belongs to them. Clearly, all of you in this room are very actively engaged in clearing that new path. Your commitment to innovation, and especially to the students who benefit from that innovation, is much needed and very much appreciated. I want to thank all of you for that commitment, and thank you for the chance to be here this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the talk, which I think provides a great perspective on, the overarching challenge, not just, higher education, but what are we trying to solve. Let me ask you in that context, there is a lot of discussion about, in education specifically, about the role of private enterprises like Cengage in driving change. And there are essentially two camps, as unfortunately it seems to be the case in a lot of debates around that. One camp that vilifies and one camp that applauds it. What do you think is the role of a company like Cengage in driving that change in education?
I think it's critical, Michael. And I want to be clear here. Let me tell you about my own personal journey in getting to this point. So in the 1980s, when I started out doing this work, I was writing about the scourge of the for-profits in education. So let me make that admission right here now in public.
That book is no longer in print, right?
No longer in print, yes. My thinking has changed dramatically since that time, and I want to tell you why. My view is that what we should care the most about is not where people are educated or who the company or entity or provider is, but what that person is actually getting out of that educational process. That's what should matter the most. One of my colleagues at Lumina Foundation says, we should not be talking about an environment of for-profit or not for-profit. We should be talking about for impact. Impact is what matters. And whether you are a for-profit company, a not-for-profit company, a B Corp, like I mentioned in the book, or something in between, it doesn't really matter to me. What matters most is, can you produce the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities that individuals actually need to be successful so that their success can contribute to our collective well-being as a society? That's what should matter.
And I think what's interesting and inherent in your answer as well, and I just want to probe on it one more time, is you mentioned it should be measured by the impact, regardless of where they get the education, the impact of the education. And I think we're moving gradually, to a point that you can actually quantify and articulate what that impact is,
That's
as
right.
opposed to getting away from sort of anecdotal. Oh, it's great to get a degree from you
Right.
name the brand name, and that's great. But now we can actually measure it much more tangibly and specifically. Would you agree with that?
I would agree. Lumina Foundation has innovated in one way in this area with the creation of something called the Degree Qualification Profile, or DQP. Some of you may have seen this. This is actually an effort to articulate proficiencies that you should have at the associate, the bachelor's, or the master's degree level, irrespective of what you studied. Right. So the point is, everyone at the associate degree level should have a certain level of knowledge and skill and civic capacity, et cetera, that you can articulate as proficiencies. At the bachelor's degree level, they should have what they had at the associate plus others, at the master's level, et cetera. And I think that that approach, which is articulating what those proficiencies are, the DQP was designed with the leading learning experts in the country. It's been used at over 600 colleges and universities in the United States. It's an effort to actually organize that conversation to say, what should students know and be able to do? You can do that through quantitative measures, you can do that through qualitative measures, you can do it through some combination of the two. But the point is, I no longer accept the idea that education is some sort of magical, mystical thing where you actually go into the environment of education and come out with this enlightenment that somehow you can't describe or possibly articulate. In fact, we can articulate it. It's going to be different for different people, as it should be. We don't want everyone to know the same thing. But I believe that we can better articulate what students should know and be able to do. And that's where the system is moving. It's very clearly moving in that way, in part because of technology, because of companies like yours, which bridge the technology and the non-technology worlds. But it's also because society is demanding it, because the talent that we need in the 21st century is simply too important for us to leave to chance, to leave to someone else to define what those outcomes are.
Right. Right. Totally agree with you. And then I said actually in another sort of talk that I gave, I said that is probably the biggest impact that technology has, what you said about making learning transparent and making outcomes transparent, right? I mean, a lot of people are talking about gadgets and features and functionalities. All that is important. But now actually learning becomes much more visible, and therefore it's subject to scientific exploration. And we can actually get better at it incrementally.
That's absolutely right. You know, there's a weird irony. Again, I've been in the space for 3 decades, so I have a lot of scars to show for it. But there's a weird irony in this space, which is that many people in higher education, fewer today than maybe a few years ago, but many people in education today continue to say, we don't prepare people for jobs, we prepare them for life, right? You've heard that line maybe many times. The fact is, we do both. We've always done both, and we better continue doing both to make people successful here in the 21st century. What do people need to be successful in work and in life? You know, what do you need to have a great job? What do you need to have a great life? Well, it's the things that we recognize are the things that we should be getting out of the educational system. Critical thinking, problem solving, communication, all of those things, quantitative reasoning, all of those things that you can actually articulate in a proactive way in terms of proficiency. That's really what society needs. Right? So for you to be successful in your home, in your community, and in your life, as well as in work, those are the same things that employers say they need for their employees to be successful. So there's been this massive talking past one another between the employer sector and the higher education sector. Higher education is coming out on the losing end of that bargain, in my opinion, because increasingly the sector is innovating. The unbundling of education, the democratization of learning is real. It's happening before our eyes, thanks to companies like yours. And yet, I don't think higher education has responded fast enough to that challenge. It's a threat to higher education in a lot of ways. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I want American higher education to succeed. But just as it has helped American society evolve in many important ways over the course of its history, it's now time for higher education to evolve as well. It needs to disrupt itself.
Yeah. And I have to say, on a personal note, I shudder at the notion of having my kids being surrounded by educators that tell them they just need a life.
Right.
Because I keep telling them they need a job, you know. So I want to make sure that. All right. Questions?
Hi. So we know the Lumina Foundation supports a lot of different innovative programs financially and through other means. Are there any specific ones that you've joined on to in the last, say, year or so that we as learning consultants should pay attention to, things that you think are really neat programs we should keep an eye to as to how it might impact the institutions that we consult with?
You know, I mentioned the DQP as one example, but let me mention another one, which is something that, again, some of you may be familiar with this because we spend a lot of time at Lumina Foundation trying not to reinvent the wheel. I think it's a useful approach to any business or organization to not reinvent the wheel. And we learned something very important from the Europeans and from now other countries around the world, which is that they've actually been going through this process of better articulating what students should know and be able to do at the level of discipline through this process called tuning. The Europeans developed the tuning process as a way to create a harmonization, if you will, across different countries so that people could actually understand what a history degree from one country means in another country. Because of the open borders in Europe, the labor markets needed that anyway, and so the smart thing that the Europeans did was engage faculty to actually get together and say, okay, we're producing degrees in chemistry. What should our students know and be able to do at each of those levels? So it's sort of the analog to the DQP, right, which is the generalizable skills. At the discipline level, we're now seeing tuning happening in a growing number of places. Tuning's taking place all across this country now. We've invested in several different tuning experiments in different disciplines, everything from graphic design to biology to the most interesting one, I have to say, is history. It's the one that people, I think, are most surprised by, which is that the American Historical Association is attempting to tune the entire discipline of history. And it's been a really interesting, rigorous debate within the field, but I think it's very valuable, and it shows that it's not just in the sort of hard sciences or in the more applied practical areas, but places like history where you can actually tune the discipline in a way that's going to have real value. I think that could be hugely important to your work and to your idea of how you better connect the learners with the engagement that's required for them to be successful.
Right there, in the back.
Hello, my name is Nashay Sylvain. It's kind of loud. I'm one of the students, a guest here for Cengage, and I just had a question I've been wanting to ask about student interaction with teachers. How do you keep that with the distance learning? Because I consider Cengage more of a distance learning type tool. How do you combine the two and keep that to where the student feels comfortable enough to go to their instructors? Because as a student myself, sometimes you feel a disconnect with your instructor through the technology.
Yeah, I think it's actually a very perceptive question, and I think I'm thankful for it, because I do think what you just articulated is at the core of what I termed is the fear of some of the faculty, because you articulated it from a student perspective. Faculty might think is like, God, if that all happens, that technology, what am I going to do? You know, what is my role? Maybe I'm not useful anymore. And I think actually the opposite is true. Okay. What I mean by that is, I don't think, personally, we will go to a world that will be completely virtual, let's say over the next 10 to 15 years, where people will sit, you know, in front of their computers and be completely outside of an educational institution and just learn online. I think what technology allows us to do is to do certain tasks that you have to and want to do alone, do those tasks in the confines of the online environment, but then have really value-added time in engaging with your teacher and really having a much more meaningful and substantive discussion about the things that you're trying to learn, the critical thinking that you're trying to develop, etc., and do it on a much more personalized basis. That's point number one. But I want to throw in one other point, which you didn't mention, but I do think it's equally important, is students learn from other students.
Correct.
Right?
And the teachers.
It's not just the teachers. The teachers are important, but students learn from other students. And I do think we need to provide an environment that peer-to-peer learning is also becoming a lot more natural, easy. And you know, you see the light bulbs go off when they can do this. And that can be online, but that can also be person to person. So for us, you know, really the focus is, as we say in our credo, the focus is the interaction between student and teacher. We want to enhance the way students learn by focusing on that interaction, as opposed to the extremes or the sort of the gospel that some people are preaching is like, oh, it's got to be all online, it's got to be all virtual, and it's completely void of human interaction. I think human interaction will become worth a lot more, and people will willing to pay a lot more once we're through this, you know, transition in technology.
True, thank you. But how are you planning to do this? Because I notice, again, speaking from a student's perspective, teachers are doing just that. They're choosing one or the other. How are you as a company coming to try and teach and guide them into combining everything, more of a synergistic frame of mind. As I
Well,
see
the first thing we were doing, and frankly, not only the first, but the major focus that we're having is when we're going into an adoption discussion with a faculty member, and we say, adopt this digital product. We are not saying, and we are deliberately not saying, adopt this digital product so people can just be online, they don't need to be in the classroom anymore, but adopt this digital product because all our digital products have features that enhance the classroom discussion, that are really contributing to the value-added face time that they're having with their students. Because now they can focus on a certain group of students. They can focus on certain subjects. So it is enhancing the classroom experience as opposed to taking it out of the classroom experience and say it's only going to be online. So the very product that we're selling with MindTap as a center of it is designed to enhance classroom expectations as opposed to a pure online experience. I think there will be instances where pure online experience for certain skills, training, in the corporate environment where that will be sufficient, but I think it will be the vast minority rather than the majority.
Thank you so much. I have other questions, but I'll let
All right, we get to them. Yes, right here.
Hey.
Heather.
Yes, thank you, Jamie. Heather Hiles with PathBright. It's good to see you. I wondered in your travels if you had come across some best practices around preparing for a diverse domestic workforce and really doing the skills upgrading and the talent development from that perspective.
Yeah, I think it's huge. I don't want to talk about any companies. It seems a little odd to do that here. But I think there are lots of ways in which that focus is really important. The smart companies, Cengage being a very good example of the smart companies, recognize that the diversity of the learners is changing very, very rapidly, and that the environment requires the customers' needs to actually be met through products that actually meet their life circumstances, their approaches to learning, et cetera. And so I think you're starting to see that in a lot of different contexts. Again, I don't want to provide too many specific examples, but you can see that happening in the space. The real question is, as this continues to evolve, are we going to actually see that evolution apply, in other words, be part of the overall transformation of the system? Are those efforts merely being targeted at diverse populations, or are those efforts actually being seen as transformative for the entire sector? I think they are inevitably going to have to be seen as transformative for the entire sector, because this is part of the nature of the American century here, the 21st century here, the second American century, because we are seeing that diversity really being reflected in who we are as a country and how we approach our work. So yeah, I'm an optimist on that question, Heather. I think there's a lot of a great opportunity ahead of us. If you look at some of the ways in which that's taking place, I think you're going to see much more of it to come. And there may be some product ideas that Cengage is developing now that may actually fit some of those needs.
Yes. The
Hi.
runner's got to wave so that we know.
Hi, Marnie Grabowski. Thank you for coming. I'm interested to hear if you're working with faculty, if you're going out and what kind of discussions you're having with faculty and what kind of feedback you're getting from faculty, and even more so, some of the education majors that are planning to go into teaching higher education and how important and crucial their role is in turning out these students that are more prepared for the workforce in this century, and what kind of feedback you're getting from them.
Yeah, we are, and I want to underscore, both in what I mentioned before, which is the tuning and the DQP, those are largely faculty-led and faculty-driven. So an institution that is actually using the degree qualifications profile to better understand what their students should know and be able to do, in almost every case that I can think of in those 600 institutions that have used it, faculty are really leading that work and driving it. And obviously, tuning is discipline-based, so that's another example. But I want to make a broader point here, because I think it's very important in terms of your question, which is that this transformation of the system of higher education is happening right now. And it is happening in part because faculty are leading elements of that change. I say that because one of the mistakes I think that we made in K-12 education reform was we came to a conclusion that the teachers were the problem, and that in order to fix the system, we have to fix the teachers. I think that has bought us a whole world of trouble in the K-12 environment that we can't afford to make in higher education. We don't need to fix the faculty. We need to engage the faculty. The faculty need to be engaged in this learning. That's really important. Now, I will say, faculty are feeling under siege, and I understand that because change is not easy to go through. When you've got people like the head of the Lumina Foundation saying competency-based learning is going to transform the system, and that is going to dramatically change the teaching and learning process, someone who is, well, what did you say, 55 years old might say, whoa, I didn't sign up for that. This is very different than what I came into this space for. And I understand that. That's hard. But I think this change is inevitable, and I think that faculty engagement is huge. It's very important. Let's not do what we did in K-12, which is create, and I think we did not do that intentionally, but I think we actually decided that teachers were, in some ways, the problem that had to be fixed. They're not the problem that has to be fixed. Teachers have to be engaged in all forms of learning in transforming that process.
And Jamie, just to build on this point, what I would add to the point that you're making about engaging faculty, I think the starting point is that we need to understand that faculty comes in very different shapes and forms and attitudes that they have. And the first sort of very simple division is you look at adjunct versus non-adjunct faculty. The adjunct life is a completely different life. Their pressures on their time, the enormous amount of stress that they're under, the time that they have to prepare lectures is a completely different world than a tenured professor at Yale.
That's right.
It's a completely different world, and I do think what we need to do is really understand how we and our solutions can help them be more productive, be more effective, and really look at their workflow as much as we're looking at the student workflow.
That's right.
We got to balance the two.
Yeah, look, the nature of the faculty has already evolved. So you mentioned the contingent workforce in higher education today. Right. So anybody know what the percentage of faculty in American higher education today that is tenure track or tenured? Any guesses? So it's less than 30% in American higher education today is tenure track or tenured. 70% of the faculty today is contingent faculty. In our public policy dialogue, you would believe that, particularly when you talk to policymakers, that our biggest problem is tenured faculty and research and all these things that are sort of boogeymen in the process. The real issue here is that stuff still exists in the elites, where many of them came from, but the reality is the sector has already changed. So we've already got a changing workforce in higher education that we need to better understand. And if I can invoke just another entity as one example, if you look at the nature, the changing nature of how places like Southern New Hampshire University or Western Governors University are rethinking what that interaction is between the learner and the facilitator, I think it's very, very important to recognize that that's not a blip. That's not an anomaly. That's a part of the evolution of the teaching and learning process that's taking place.
Totally agree. Yeah.
I have a question back here. Behind you.
Well, yeah.
Thanks for all this compelling conversation. We really appreciate it. I wanted to focus back on the talent development and talent deployment. I think traditionally we've thought of that kind of internally as a private sector where we're getting graduates coming in and then we train and develop them. And I'm interested, you're talking probably more externally in a sense, collaborating with the education system and impacting that. And how do you see that happening? Is that going to be competency-based again? Is it going to be working with them to define really the skill sets that can cross over multiple industries? And I really liked also just kind of, you brought up some other things. The engaging faculty is huge, but the best educators engage the student. And that's really what I see is when we scale faculty who are engaging the students. And we can do that through technology or taking one person and taking it out across multiple sections with our technology. So I'd be interested just to kind of see what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, think about any of the themes that I mentioned in the book, right? Immigration, urban policy, private sector innovation, et cetera. The point is, talent is the outcome that we need as a society. That's the important thing. It's the knowledge, skills, and abilities that we need for those individuals to be successful, being honed through the education and the experience, et cetera, so that it'll impact them and impact us as a society. So talent is really a sort of broadening of the view of what we need as a society. In the space of education, the reason why that's important is because the fundamental nature of the learning relationship is changed. In the current model, or in the recent historical model, depending on where you see this, the institutions of higher education, colleges and universities, were the center of that system. That is clearly no longer going to be the case. The learners are going to be the center of that system. And in a learner-centered system, you are going to have multiple providers, of which colleges and universities are one very important element of that provider universe, that are going to provide that knowledge, skills, and abilities, the talent that we need in order for them to be successful. But they're going to get that in lots of different ways besides just in the traditional learning context. And that's part of what I try to get at in the book here, which is that what we should be really talking about, the chapter on higher education in the book I call It's the Learning Stupid, because I think that really that's the important thing that we need to focus on, which is what's the learning that needs to take place, and how do you actually apply that in your life, in your work, in order to make you successful, in order to make us successful as a society. That's talent. That's really what the talent that we need here in the 21st century in order to make us prosperous, to make us more successful, to increase that gross talent product, that $7 trillion number that some group of economists came up with. That's how we actually make a real difference in terms of our combined success as a society. So we've got a lot to do in what I would call the traditional environment in order to rethink the system. Too much of our conversations are within the sector, so there's a lot of bilateral negotiation that happens between colleges and universities, within colleges and universities. If you look at the public policy environment, it's still overwhelmingly institution-centric. That's clearly got to change. The market is changing that. There's so much pressure happening on the market now that things like, how do you allocate financial aid for students who aren't learning in a college or university, but who are getting high-quality outcomes, the learning outcomes that Michael was talking about, that we can actually measure, that we can actually articulate? How do you actually provide support for those individuals that Heather was mentioning who need to be educated, not for their well-being, but for our collective success as a society? So that's a big part of what we've got to focus on.
We have a question back here.
Just one more. Do you focus then on skills, trades, vocations, those types of opportunities then as well? Because I know we're talking about higher ed, but that's part of this conversation.
Absolutely. I think it's a continuum. I do think there's a false dichotomy here between education and training. I said this in a higher ed audience and got booed off the stage. So let me try it in this audience and see if that's true. I'm having difficulty understanding what the difference is now between education and training. I say that as someone who's worked in education for these 3 decades. I'm having real difficulty understanding that. And the reason I'm having difficulty is, it goes back to that point that I made, which is that you need out of your education to have those generalizable or soft skills and the hard knowledge, the content that you get out of whatever you're studying, whatever you're majoring in, whatever it may be. Well, in the training environment, we're increasingly seeing soft skills being the most important part of what they're doing. You look at all these training providers and the ways in which the Department of Labor is focusing on these training programs, as much of that is about life skills and soft skills as it is about the actual technical specific skills that people need to develop in order to do that particular job. So I think the point is, yes, it needs to be all of those things. All of it is what I think we should continue to call post-secondary learning, because I think it is beyond what we will, for the foreseeable future, see as the sort of endpoint of a high school credential of some type. But everything post-high school, whether it's workforce-based, whether it's in a college or university, I don't care if it's a library or a museum, it doesn't really matter. We should figure out how to actually capture that, measure it, and articulate it, define it in a way that's actually going to meet our talent needs as a country.
And Jamie, I would argue that the reason that you got booed off the stage, and I mean that very seriously, is this statement that you just made, that we need to think beyond the labeling of this is higher ed, this is training, is threatening to somebody who is comfortable in the current system.
Right.
And I would argue that that is a challenge that we have as well.
Yes.
Right? I mean, we are very comfortable in the current system where education is institution-centric, adoption, and we're falling in love with the system because the system is very predictable and it gives us adoptions and etc. So we need to continue to challenge ourselves to really think about it in the way which I completely agree with, which is, it will turn into a much more student and learning-centric environment, or is turning already, and we now need to array our products, our solution, our approaches to that new reality and try to drive productivity from that new reality, as opposed to, just defend the old system and say, like, it's got to stay the way it is.
Right. I think this sounds less sympathetic than I mean it to, but welcome to the club. This is what everybody else in America has had to go through, right? The steel industry,
everybody,
the media, all of these industries that have been disrupted.
Right.
This is exactly what all of those people said. My God, what happened to my job? What happened to my world that I knew? Well, that's what's happening in higher education. And my plea is that we proactively engage in it, because we actually have the talent in higher education to make that change be truly transformational.
We do.
And if we resist it, I fear there's going to be alternative systems developed that are actually going to be parallel, inefficient, not as productive, and I don't think that serves us.
And I completely agree with you, and I didn't take it at all as unsympathetic. In fact, I would take it as encouraging, because I believe these are the opportunities where we will see a separation from the winners and the losers.
Yes.
Right?
Indeed.
I mean, think about other transformations like the newspaper industry.
Right.
Right? You know who the winners are, you know who the losers are. So in that respect, I think it is as much an opportunity.
That's right.
So
We had a question.
my question is sort of right there. We've talked a bit about the challenges we have and some of the somewhat adversarial relationships that we have in this industry. And my question is, particularly as we come in as a vendor, almost any vendor, but particularly publishers, there's sort of an inherent adversarial piece there, especially when we look at things like open source education and all of these things that are kind of coming up to kind of combat the publishers. So my question is, how do we foster a better environment of collaboration and partnership as we're going into our institutions and attempting to work with them?
Right. I mean, I'd love to hear Jamie talk on this, but I do think, for me personally, it goes back to this fundamental principle that we need to focus on what is the objective that we're jointly trying to achieve. And we need to be very clear and transparent about this with faculty, with institutions, and be explicit about it. Say, here's what we're trying to achieve, and here's how we're going to try to measure that, quantitatively or subjectively. But here's what we're going to do. Then I think you can start to have a conversation about those outcomes. And you can go there, and you can go with data and Kevin made the point earlier, you can go as a real partner and say, so how's your class doing? Let's look, but then we're talking the same language, right? The adversarial aspect comes into play when people tell you anecdotes, right? Well, I think all publishers are really bad because they want to make a profit, right? Yeah, so what is an institution doing? I mean, they want to make a profit too, so how does that juxtapose it? So I think the more we can make it a rational discussion about shared objectives, really talking about specific data point and facts and less about anecdote, the better off we're going to be. Does that make sense? Yeah?
Right, we have a question back here. This way, backside.
Okay. Sorry, I'm getting disoriented.
60% by 2025.
Yeah.
I think that's a great goal. And a lot of the things I've been thinking, I've heard from other people coming here. What about the other 40% by 2030? And how can Cengage be a part of bringing everyone up to that level where they're prepared for a new world?
Yeah. I love it. In fact, several states have set goals. So we started this goal-setting exercise in 2008. So that was the first year we did it. President Obama set a goal. Many governors have now done so. One of the states that has done that is the state of Oregon, which actually has done exactly what you're talking about, which is articulate what the entire needs are, not just the post-secondary learning needs, but also the rest of it. And I think that's really important, because the point is, in a knowledge economy, everyone's knowledge, skills, and abilities has to grow, and I think that's really important. The reason why we set the goal, and it's a funny thing to say because we think achieving the goal, it is a hairy goal, it is ambitious to try to get there, but we've actually had some conversations about whether it's ambitious enough, because if you actually take the labor force projections and understand the changing nature of work, 60% may be too low of a bar by 2030. So now we've got a problem that we're going to have to address here, which is how do we bring the people along that entire pipeline so that they're all moving through the system, so that they're all gaining higher levels of knowledge, skills, and abilities, and they can actually get them to that level of talent that they need to be successful. The fact is, in the current economy, if you have a high school credential, your chances of being in the middle class are diminishing as we speak. They are declining. There are fewer and fewer jobs. It's like the classic case of musical chairs. There's a musical chair game going on over here for the people with post-secondary skills and talent, and there's people over here with less than post-secondary. More and more chairs are being added to that game. More and more of them are being taken away from this game. That's just the fact of the American labor market. So we've got to figure out how to grow it all, but we got to get as many of those people as possible into this game, because that's what it's going to mean in order for them to be successful in their work and in life.
Okay.
I have one.
We have
right
a
here.
question over here.
Wait, I think we have time for one more question, and
I have one right here.
Better-
right. Yeah, over there. All right.
Great, thank you. So Jamie, excellent work. I want to talk about the program we have, 21 Voices, and we have our annual report outside coming this afternoon. Two of the things in that report that we found goes back to...
Do you want to explain to Jamie what 21 Voices is? Just
Sure.
in
21 Voices is a longitudinal study that we have with 21 students across the nation, and that we start with their freshman year, and we follow them through their four-year college, whatever college is to them, online or offline. But also then we follow up with the postgrads for a year to see
A
exactly
longitudinal
what
study. I started my career as a researcher. I'm palpitating. Go on.
We're extremely lucky. It's very rare for us, for anyone to do that. Anyway, so this is our second year. We have the report out, and we have found 5 opportunities that really hearken and focus on many of the topics you've mentioned. One being, how do you learn after you go to college? Students have said, I've learned, but now I know I'm going to have to relearn.
Right.
I'm going to have multiple careers. So we are starting to think about ways to attract those students and how they're thinking and how to provide them with support. The other opportunity we have harkens back to the student who asked about, I'm an online student, I need teacher support. A lot of our students we have found from the 21 Voices is saying, I'm online, but I want the benefits of being on campus.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really doable opportunity for Cengage to do it. And everything else you've mentioned, we also touch on. So thank you for your work. And we have 500 copies to give out today, so first come, first serve. We also have others that you can have back in the office. Thank
so
you.
You noticed this was a shameless plug and
Yeah,
not
I
really a question for
appreciate
you. You know?
And it was.
Well done. Looking forward to seeing it.
Terrific. So
Last question.
I first really want to thank you again, Jamie, for coming, sharing your thoughts, and I think it's just in a very profound way terrific how your broader picture about the change and the talent America needs fits with what we are trying to do as a company and how we are trying to contribute to that in a meaningful way, and as I said, hopefully at scale. So thank you again.
Thank you for the great work
again
you're
for
doing.
coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, before everybody leaves, this is a purely tactical decision that I'm going to make right now, because this is going to be the last time today that we're going to have everybody in the same room and your undivided attention before you go out and do the whole program and before everybody grabs coffee. And I know that Kevin wants to make an announcement, and I just want to take the next 3 minutes and allow Kevin to make that announcement while you and I go off stage.
Thank you, guys, one more time. That was awesome. That was outstanding. Thank you so much. That was really great. Now, just quickly, because the memorandum will go out later today, but just to tell you in real time, we've been on a search for a chief marketing officer. If you're new here, Sandy Kirshner joined us 3 years ago, has brought marketing so close to the customer, aligned real tightly with product and sales. And then a few months ago, Sandy took on a huge new challenge to be our chief communications officer, reporting to Michael. You're going to meet Sandy tomorrow. You're going to love what Sandy has to say tomorrow. But I'm delighted to say that the search is complete, and we're bringing in a new chief marketing officer. Her name is Sharon Loeb. She starts with us in 2 weeks. We have some Sharon fans in the crowd. Outstanding. Sharon will be here in 2 weeks. Sharon is also highly customer-driven and data-driven, and she's great on strategy, and I think she's an incredible cultural fit for us, and delighted to have the search complete and delighted to move into the new year with the new Chief Marketing Officer. Thank you very much. All right.
I'm gonna give you my heart, 'cause you're a sky full of stars.